Hi, everybody. Happy February. We're well into February by this point. Welcome to your Money Map. I'm Jean Chatzky. Thank you so much for joining me today. I am very excited to tell you that we are going to be talking about the intersection of health and wealth. It's not possible these days to have a robust and lasting financial life unless you've got good health to go along with it. And it's not really possible to maintain good health anymore unless you've got the financial life to support it. Well, my guest today, Dr. Carolyn Mcclanahan, is the best suited person I know to talk about both because she is both a doctor and a financial planner. She's actually three-hatted. She wears three hats. She is a financial educator as well. And she has the knack of bringing simplicity to all of the subjects that she knows best. She founded Life Planning Partners in 2004 and has been growing her financial platform ever since. Her medical background, intertwined with personal finance, just opened her eyes to the finances of aging, of planning for illness, of end of life, and of healthcare costs. And so, Carolyn, it is such a pleasure to have you with me today. Welcome.
Jean, it's an honor to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, thank you. And as we welcome our audience joining us from both Facebook and LinkedIn, I want to let people know that, of course, this is one of those conversations where we welcome your input, we welcome your questions, we welcome your comments. We will weave them into the conversation. So please participate as much as you like, or just sit back and learn from all the amazing things that I know Carolyn is going to have to say. Before we dig into the subject matter, I think your background is both fascinating and unusual. Tell us a little bit about how you went from medicine to finance to the decision to bring them both together.
Well, so it started out in high school. I was like a big math nerd, and my nickname was the human calculator. So my dad said, you have to be an accountant, and you can't do what your dad tells you. So I decided to be something sexy, or I wanted to become an actuary. And I started out in college in all the higher level math, and I'm like, oh God, this is boring. And I loved my biology classes, and I was an athletic trainer in college, and I decided to become a physical therapist. And then I realized how hard it was to get in physical therapy school, and that physical therapists just do what doctors tell them to do. And I'm like, gosh, if I got to work this hard, I want to be the boss. I don't want anybody bossing me around. So I went to med school, and I loved patient care. I ended up practicing family medicine and emergency medicine, mostly emergency medicine. But meanwhile, all that time, I had my IRA. I loved financial stuff, so I paid attention to it. And my husband, his parents unfortunately died at a fairly young age. He inherited some money. We invested that in the late 90s, 95 to 2000, and we did well. And we thought we were just absolutely brilliant. And now we just know we were just really lucky. And he wanted to quit being an engineer. And so we tried to find a financial planner to see, could he quit his job and me not have to support him? Because I didn't want to support him. He wanted to be a track coach. So and a photographer. This is his photography. He wanted to be a photographer. And so we tried to find a financial planner. They were all about investments and not really doing financial planning. I went back to school for fun, fell in love with it, and opened my practice in 2004. And it was then I started to see all these intersections of how health affects finances, finances affects health. And I just started doing these talks and writing. And before you know it, I'm very grateful and honored that I get to speak to a lot of people about these important topics.
I teed up the intersection of health and wealth at the top of the show, but this is the world where you live every single day. How do you see health and money being intertwined, especially as it comes to aging?
Well, so the hardest thing about personal finance is that we spend way too much time trying to predict a future that's really not predictable. And so when we have health issues, whether we're healthy or unhealthy, there are things that are going to cost you money financially from either of those paths. And what I like to say to people is you really need to plan for who you are and not who you want to be. And so when you're young, if you're not having a healthy lifestyle, if you're overweight, if you smoke, you're going to have things that can happen down the road. And we can't predict that, but we can put the pieces in place to provide resiliency when those bad things are happening. And likewise, if you live a totally healthy lifestyle, then you're going to live a long time, but you're going to have actually higher healthcare costs over the long term because you're going to live longer, which is a good thing, but you also have a higher risk of dementia. So you have to plan differently based on who you are. So my goal is to get people to think about who they really are so they can plan appropriately.
Why do you think it is that people don't take who they are into consideration, but rather who they want to be? I mean, that's a concept that's a little bit tough to wrap our brains around because it indicates that maybe we don't either know ourselves very well, or that we're just not being honest with ourselves.
It's a combination of all of it. It's like I've met people who are, very overweight. And when, as a doctor, and when you show them on the scale what their body mass index is, and it's like, well, you're actually morbidly obese, they're like shocked. And so they just don't understand what that means. And then a lot of, we see these idealized lifestyles, especially with social media. So people have these unrealistic expectations of what they should be. And so it's part delusion, part just not knowing. And people just really need to look and say, okay, what am I really about? And what's that make the likelihood of bad things happening in the future, and how I can prepare. And, I tell people this is not a judgment thing. We all are human. We all have our challenges. Some people have to work 2 jobs, single moms. I mean, and so we have to, if somebody's overweight, it's not necessary. It's most likely not even their fault. There's so much in society that just has led to 70% of the population being overweight or obese. So we've got to drop that judgment and quit judging ourselves so hard and give grace to ourselves. And when we quit that judgment, it allows us to see ourselves a little bit better and face the truth of where we are, and then decide, can I fix this and hopefully live a healthier, more financially healthier life too? Or am I just stuck? And then you figure out, where can I get help to do the best I can with where I am?
Yeah, I see a very big parallel with finances, because one of my money rules, and I've got 100 of them, is that hope is not an investment strategy.
Exactly right.
Hope is not a strategy for fixing your health either, right? You have to dig in, and you have to take some steps in order to make a plan. So once you've figured out who you are, how do you go about making the right sort of plan for that person? And I know you've sort of broken people down into 4 different types of people.
Yeah. So when you're thinking from a health issue, I've broken it down into 4 categories. It's the unhealthy person, whether it's lifestyle or you already have an illness, who just really can't do anything about it or refuses to do anything about it. And then you have the healthy person, or the unhealthy person, that's doing everything they can, and they have resources, and they go to the doctor and they can try to fix it. Then you have the healthy person who can overuse healthcare. They go everything. And I laugh. I say, my husband goes when he gets a hangnail or itchy rear end, so that can have a lot of issues too when you overuse healthcare, because it gets expensive, and then you set yourself up for finding things that aren't things. And then finally, the healthy person who doesn't use healthcare at all, which can be bad, or uses it just when they really need it, which actually is probably the best situation. And so you have to kind of figure out, where are you in that category, and then what's your life going to look like going forward. And that's both in the short-term healthcare costs, the longer-term healthcare costs, and then long-term care costs. So for example, the unhealthy person, I always say, this is the person that's at the casino pulling the thing, and they're like trying to win money, and they're drinking, and then all of a sudden they get this little chest pain and they go, oh, give me some Pepto-Bismol, and they die in the casino, right? Because they've had a heart attack and they don't pay attention to themselves. Well, that person actually is going to have not real high healthcare costs because they're not going to live long.
Right.
Yep. So thinking about where you fit in that and being honest with yourself.
I think a lot of us are not especially honest about our longevity or the longevity of our parents, who many of us are helping to either take care of or will help to take care of at some point. How do you think about longevity and planning for longevity in a financial sense?
So it's really important. The problem is, again, you can't predict the future, and you could live a totally healthy lifestyle and you have good genetics. You've got to plan for longevity, but don't worry so much about it that you don't enjoy life now. That one of the first questions we ask our clients when they walk in the door is, are you happy now? And if not, that's a huge problem, because and this is me being an ER doctor, I saw so many people die too soon or get serious illnesses, even if they live the greatest of lifestyles. And likewise, I saw people who burned their candles from both ends easily live into their 90s. You just can't really predict, but you do go on some statistics there. So if you're not happy now, you have to stop and say, what's making me not happy? Because if you have a lot going on and you're not taking care of yourself because you're not happy, that ends up being, both financially and health-wise, just a bad choice. So whether it's career changes or relationship issues, figuring that out, and then making sure that you're saving for I break it into the needs and the wants. People need to be saving for the day they can no longer work. And I would love then to get rid of that ideal dream of retirement. I think we should quit talking about retirement, and people should enjoy life along the way in jobs they love, if possible, and then work as long as possible, because your human capital, your ability to work, is actually your safest asset. So saving along the way for needs, saving as much as you possibly and comfortably can for the wants, but don't sacrifice happiness today.
When we talk about needs versus wants, sometimes it sounds to me, and I'm sure it sounds to you, like the conversation we should be having with our, little children. You don't need this, you just want this. But when it comes to us as adults and us as older adults, I think it gets a little squishy. I think it gets to the point where, something that maybe not feel important to you actually feels like a need to me. How do we break those things down from the perspective of living a long life, living an adult life?
Yeah, and that's really tough, because everybody has different things that make them happy. And study after study shows that experiences with money make us happier than owning things. And so people who need a lot of the physical things, the second home, the fancy cars and all that, it's way more expensive to keep that lifestyle. And actually, it feeds that short-term dopamine, but not the long term. And so you need to break it down first, is what is the minimal, like what's a food bill to me? And it is fun because, we take care of 100 different client families, and we actually help people track their spending every year. And we have some clients that have these minimal little food bills, and some people that just spend a huge amount of money on food. And there's no judgment there. We all have our things. But I say, okay, if the world fell apart and all of a sudden your money is gone, what is absolutely you have to have, and maybe you have to drop the food delivery service and actually go pick up your food, or things like that. So just breaking down into making them realize what is really, really important there.
When you're trying to get a sense on this number, do you think that we have gotten any additional insight from living through this COVID year?
Oh gosh, yes. I think this has made people really reevaluate what's important to them. more family. I love, and this is the doctor in me, I love seeing people actually exercise and be outside more and communicate better with their families. And so I think we're going to see a lot of, I hate adversity, but sometimes a lot of good things come out of it. And I think people are seeing that they don't need all the fancy trips, that all the accessories. I have people selling things that second homes, because now it's so hard to get to a second home because of all the travel issues. And we know that's likely going to go away, but it really, also the fascinating thing we've seen is when we redo client projections every year, and the spending has just gone down dramatically for everybody. And it's like, well, look at your projections, and when you become financially independent based on this COVID spending, what are you really missing, and making certain that you're adding, once COVID's gone, adding things back very thoughtfully that they're really bringing value to your life.
When you define financial independence for your clients, how do you define it?
So that's when you can afford the life that you want to afford, without having to work anymore, basically. But see, we still, even when people have technically reached financial independence, we love for them to stay engaged in some sort of occupation, again, because work is your safest asset. But plus, now here's the doctor and me talking again. People who stay engaged in an occupation, it gives them a better sense of purpose, keeps them more physically active, socially engaged. So there's just so many benefits to staying involved in work. And what we do at that point, if people, again, you break it into needs versus wants, true financial independence to me is when everybody's needs and wants are saved for, and they can afford all that. To me, good basic financial independence is when you've at least saved for the needs and you continue to work to earn that extra money for the wants.
So let's talk about those two concepts and how we pay for them. And we'll put your financial planner hat on here. If we want to pay for these things in a sustainable way, we know we've got Social Security, we know we've got the money that we have socked away. How do we make sure that that money lasts as long as we do?
Well, so first off, you've got to determine, do you have more than enough, or barely enough, or not enough? And for people who have more than enough, they have a lot more options. They can, have a great diversified portfolio where they figure out what their income stream needs to be every year. People who are marginal, that it looks like they may have enough, that's where things like fixed annuities come in, that pay. And especially if you're going to live a long time, if you have you don't know whether you're going to live a long time, but
right.
if you have the genetics to that, you probably have longevity on your side. That's when you're not sure whether you're going to run out of money, then that's where immediate fixed annuities are just a great tool to use for that. And then people who don't have enough, and they can't work anymore, that's where annuities may come in as immediate annuities, because you want to make sure you don't outlive your money, and at least a portion should go into something that's going to guarantee you income for life.
Yeah, like the point is just having that amount of money, and there are a lot of ways to get there, right? But
exactly,
it's income that that is protected. I mean, in my house, my husband is fortunate in that he has a pension, and he's just at the age where he had to figure out how he was going to take that. So, we went through the calculations to work out those numbers, and that's a form like Social Security of protected income, and like an annuity. But it's a problem that you should be solving for, to make sure at least those needs are covered. Where does, and I do want to, we got a question early on from Juan, who asks, are there any good CDs short term? And I just want to raise that. I know I want to raise that because, we've got an issue right now with people who are trying to make their money go as far as possible without taking a lot of risk in retirement, right? We want to make sure we're capturing the return that we would like to capture, but we shouldn't be, and we know this, at least I know this, taking more risk than you feel comfortable with, or than is good for you, is not the right way to go about it.
No.
So how are you dealing with this interest rate issue for your clients right now?
Well, so this is a really tough time because not only do we have really low interest rates, the stock market has been crazy and it's, the valuations are just really expensive. And I know 10 years forward looking, one, you can't predict the future, but 10 years forward looking, it just doesn't look like the opportunity for great returns. In the short term, at least. And, so I tell people there's really no good CDs out there right now. There just isn't. And in fact, money markets are probably the better place to be, even though they're bad too, but at least you have flexibility and liquidity with that money. If it's money that's longer term, that's why I stress to everybody, they need an investment policy. How much are you going to be in safe assets like bonds, fixed annuities, and other CDs, even though we don't love those right now, and how much is going to be in risky assets. And if you're barely, if you're marginal where you are on needing money, that's when it might be time to think about trying to pick up some side work. And because again, from the physical and financial standpoint, that can be what supplements. And making $20,000 a year in some job, it's like having 500,000 in the bank if you think about it. So I wish I could give a better answer to that, and it's just a tough one right now.
No, I think the answer to keep working at least part-time as long as you can is a really good one. I mean, it staves off loneliness. It's really helpful from that perspective, but it also can allow you to delay taking Social Security, which can be a huge return on your money.
That's a great point. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, so too many people take Social Security way too early. And if you can delay, please, please, please do.
I want to bring long-term care into this question and where that fits on the scheme of needs and wants. When you think about paying for long-term care and those profiles of the people that you gave us earlier, the healthy and the unhealthy, how do you solve for that?
This is another tough one. The problem is when you need to be thinking about long-term care is when you're in your 50s and early 60s. And people, of course, put that decision off as long as possible, and they ignore the signs that problems could be occurring. The only people that really ever think about are people who had to deal with their parents going through it. And so the first step to me in any long-term care planning, people immediately talk about long-term care insurance. It's actually thinking about the logistics of how you're going to get your long-term care when you need it. 70% of people need long-term care. The other 30% are a little more fortunate and die quickly. I don't know whether that's fortunate or unfortunate, but they don't have the big long-term care expenses. So you have to think about how are you going to get your care? So people who say, and you get this all the time, I want to die in my home. And I had one client says, you're going to have to pull me out by my cold blue toenails. And that's an issue though, because if somebody gets dementia and they need round the clock care, that can easily be a couple $100,000 a year. And the break even point for when it's less expensive to actually move in a facility is about 10 to 15 hours of care a week. A day. And it depends on where you live, where that break even point is. But thinking in advance, if I need long-term care, am I going to try to get it at home? How long? And when am I willing to move to a facility? And if you say to your kids, never move me to a nursing home, they are going to spend every last dime and make everybody destitute trying to keep you at home. And if you have a spouse that's still alive, that's a huge problem. So thinking through the logistics of when you're going to move, when you're going to get help with financial decision making, because a big mistake a lot of older people make is they think they're still great with their money and they're losing it and they don't know they're losing it. And so getting somebody to help you with your finances. And then when you're going to quit driving, that's a financial decision, especially if you're not going around very much. Car's not cheap to keep around. Plus, at some point, it becomes not safe. And then when you're going to get help with healthcare decisions, because healthcare people not talking about what's important to them, especially in the last couple of years of life, can be very, very expensive and add a lot to the cost of long-term care. So after you figured out those logistics, then you figure out, how am I going to pay for it? And
before you answer the how am I going to pay for it question, and I'm going to get you to answer it, but there are a lot of parents and a lot of people who don't want to have these conversations.
It's hard conversations.
They are hard conversations. So how do you tee them up? And when you do have the parent who's saying, you have to pull me out of this house. I am not going to a nursing home ever, ever, ever.
Mhm.
What do you say back?
So, first off, these conversations need to happen really early, like you're hearing me today. You should, and you have an elder parent, you should go talk to them like now. And the way you bring it up is you say, hey, I've heard that the cost of like aging and long-term care can get really, really expensive. And I love you. And I want to make sure that we're doing a good job helping you when you get older. I'd like to have a conversation about what the plans are and what you've done and what I can do to help you. And so when you put it in a place of concern and caring, which you hope that's really where it's coming from, because it should, then they're more likely to open up. And sometimes, though, I call it, and we've all heard the term planting seeds. You might just have to plant a seed and they're not going to be happy about it, but you've opened the conversation. And then if they refuse to talk about it, periodically you have to bring it back up. And it may be by pivoting to the different parts where aging is becoming an issue. Like what are you going to do to get help around the house? I know you don't see so well anymore and the house is falling apart. You can say it nicer, but you go into an old person's home, they don't see well. And so they don't realize the paint's peeling off the wall and that the furniture has gotten saggy and things like that. So just every opportunity in a loving way, bringing up those little issues to get them to open up about the subject.
And sometimes I think it helps to share what you've done as an adult child. And we need to all share these things with our spouses as well. We had a conversation yesterday, you and I, in advance of this interview. And you told me you've been very, very clear with your husband about your wants and your needs, to the point where he knows exactly what you would want. It would make it easier for him to make decisions and talk to doctors and handle everything from finances to healthcare if he had to do that. All right, let me bring it back around. How do we pay for this long-term care that has the potential to be very expensive?
Right. So this is where are you healthy or unhealthy comes into play. So if you are an unhealthy person, the average long-term care need is 2 to 3 years. Well, it's the unhealthy people that are pulling that average down. So your likely care need is only going to be about 2 years. Now, it's really important, though, that you have good advance directives. And this is another really hard topic for people because they don't want to think about, well, gosh, if grandma's like at the end, I want to do everything to keep her going. Well, there may become a time that you don't want to keep her going and she doesn't want to be kept going because it's time to go. And so if you had those talks around what's important about quality of life, it makes it less likely that all that money is going to be spent. So if you're unhealthy, I tell people, make sure that your family can afford 2 years worth of care. And look, you can look in your area and see what that costs, because if you have 2 years worth of care covered, the nursing homes will take you because they know that you're not likely going to live that long. So that's the unhealthy. Any comments or questions on that one?
Just that you threw out the term advance directive, and I want to make sure everybody knows that's your healthcare proxy. It's a power of attorney for your healthcare that lets somebody else make decisions for you. It's a living will that spells out whether or not you want life support and other things. It's a durable power of attorney for your finances.
Well, and I want to make clear too, not only do you need to do those legal documents, you need to have conversations around quality of life. And this is what you and I talked about yesterday. A lot of people see people who have end-stage dementia, or they just have this horrible, quality of life at the end. And so to say to yourself, what's important to me about quality of life? If I no longer could do it, I would no longer want to live. And again, hard conversation, but I did a study in my practice of my client families, and everybody came up with 4 things. The ability to communicate. So if you could never communicate again or understand what is happening, and it's never going to come back, do you want to keep living? Everybody said no. If you could no longer eat your food, and some people, they're okay being somebody's feeding them, but if you can't swallow anymore and you need a feeding tube, almost everybody didn't want a feeding tube. And so they wanted the ability to enjoy food. I had a client with ALS. He says, the day I can no longer drink my wine, put me in hospice. And so these are good measures that people can understand. And then, can you groom yourself? And that's the one, Gene, I told you it's kind of gross, but that's the one I told my husband. If the doctor says I can never wipe my own rear end again, I want you to, and we're saying ever again, I want you to put me in hospice, pull the plug, because that means my brain is never going to work to know my rear end needs to be wiped. Or for me, it means that I'm going to be a quadriplegic. I'm a big cyclist. And so I have, that risk of being in a cycling accident. And there's so many high functioning quadriplegics who have a great quality of life, but I don't have that good a constitution and I have control issues. And so my husband knows, just call it quits on me right then and there. And then finally is interaction. Some people say, if I'm that demented person that they go park in the corner of the nursing home and nobody talks to me all day and I don't even know who I'm talking to or what I'm talking about, if I get some sort of illness, let me go. And by documenting what's important about quality of life with your family, with your healthcare providers, it's much more likely they're actually going to follow through and honor those wishes. And you hate to say it, that ends up being cheaper. And, people hate talking about that, but it's a fact of life. The better care actually ends up, because it's not withdrawing care, it's moving you to comfort care, palliative care, hospice. And that's the way to go.
Yeah. And there's a very good resource called the 5 Wishes Living Will that you can find online, and it'll take you in a compassionate way through these questions with your loved ones. So if people are looking for a way to do it, that's a good way to go. All right. For the healthy person, right? For whom it's going to cost more potentially, because you might live a long time and because you might need to be in a facility that handles issues with forgetfulness and dementia. How do you pay for it at that point? And we've gotten some specific questions from the crowd, and I will I'll go to you guys. I'm seeing them, and I will go to them in just a second. But let's take these.
Yep. So the average need for healthy people who get dementia for care is actually about 5 years, and it can be much, much longer. I mean, hearts can last a long time if you're healthy, even if your brain's not there. And so you have to prepare a little differently. First, do you have a spouse that you have to worry about or not? Because if you have a spouse, you have to make sure you don't decimate everything and leave your spouse high and dry. If you don't have a spouse, it makes it actually a little bit easier. Then you have to decide, am I willing to spend down all my assets and go on Medicaid later? And we hope that Medicaid is still available. If you have at least, again, 2 years worth of payments, nursing homes will be happy to take you. Currently, they do a good job of keeping you even if you have to go on Medicaid. But, a stat just came out recently, 65% of nursing homes say they may go bankrupt by next year. And so, which is a little scary because that gives them more incentive because Medicaid pays so much less that they might end up turfing you to a different institution if you end up going on Medicaid. So, we do need big changes in legislation around long-term care, but that's another conversation. And so, but you need to have at least 2 years, ideally longer. You may want to cover it through long-term care insurance. And then you have a choice of, do you get a traditional policy, which can be expensive and it can change and the prices can go up in the future. So you have to be prepared for that. Or do you buy a hybrid policy, a combination life insurance, long-term care policy, where you at least have a bucket of money set aside to pay for long-term care. And usually, it depends on your age, when you buy it. But $100,000 will usually buy about 3 years worth of care, depending on where you are. And that's a good starting place. The other reason I like for people to have money segregated for long-term care in that situation, if you have different family members that they may have different ideas about their inheritance, if you have a bucket of money set aside, then they're more likely to pay for your care instead of trying to hoard the money for their future self.
Interesting. All right. A couple of specifics from our crowd, and thank you guys for being so patient. Linda says, great advice. She's suggesting a universal life insurance policy with a long-term care rider. Have you used those? And what do you think? I mean, full disclosure, I bought a I bought a whole life policy with a long-term care rider.
Right. And that is an option too. So generally, those policies do better, provide better life insurance and not as rich a long-term care benefit. So you have to decide for yourself what's more important to me. Is it the life insurance benefit for my family, or is it the long-term care benefit? So you just have to look at your situation, decide whether the hybrid policy that's geared towards more long-term care is better versus the type of policies you guys were just talking about.
Okay. Back to our bonds conversation. How do you feel about fixed index annuities instead of bonds? And Craig is asking specifically tied to the S&P. He says he's getting good returns over the last 3 years with no risk of loss.
Well, and that depends. The fixed annuity, indexed annuities, they do have expenses and they do have a lot of traps that people don't understand until they need to take the money out. So it's really important to understand the policy, to understand the holes. If when you're going to need that money, the surrender periods and all that. So just be really careful. And it is an option. And I'm not a fan, though, personally, of those.
Well, and I think this is, though, just back to the point, Carolyn, that there are so many different solutions to get to the point where you're trying to cover that need, that this is where having an advisor becomes so incredibly helpful.
Oh, absolutely. And especially when you're trying to plan income for life, it's like, you don't want to make any big mistakes. We all, you look back, it's like, I wish I would have done that, especially had the market gone up. But if the market goes down and you are more conservative, you're like, yay. So it's important people think that they know more than they really know. And just like we talked about earlier, people are blind to who they are and how smart they are. And so it's good to get an objective outside opinion from a fiduciary advisor.
Yeah. And Christy's asking, what's the best way to find a financial planner in a new location? Christy, I'm actually going to send you to my website, hermoney.com. We've got a financial advisor locator, basically. We've got a partnership up with an organization called WealthRamp. If you'll find it very easily on the site. Just search for WealthRamp. You fill out this questionnaire and we'll surface several recommendations for fiduciary advisors based on your criteria. Nobody's going to call you. Nobody's going to charge you any money for this. And it'll be up to you whether you want to get in touch. But they've all been vetted. So that's why we were willing to put that out there. Carolyn, any thoughts on the best way to find a financial advisor for her?
Well, first off, you have to look at what your needs are too, because advisors charge differently. So some charge hourly, some charge fixed fees, some charge based on the assets they're managing. Some do really good financial planning. Some focus on investment management. I encourage you highly to get somebody that's doing good financial planning, because you don't know how to invest your money if you don't have a good financial plan. And so you have to decide what's the best way for you to pay to get that advice. And Jean's site's great. And you can go to napfa.org. That's all fee-only financial planners. XY Planning Network is fee-only financial planners. So there are other resources lots of different resources out there to find a good planner. And remember, you don't necessarily need one in your area. I think the Zoom world has taught us that you've got to find the right advisor for you, and they may not be in your area.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. Personally, my advisor is a couple of states away, and it has been a problem.
Yep.
I want to. Sharon is asking if we can discuss VA benefits, and that is not. That's not my field of expertise. But Sharon, what I want to promise you is we are doing these shows every 2 weeks. We're going to get a military expert on this show. It is time that we have a show that is devoted to that. So that
would be fantastic.
We will tee that up, military financial expert in the future. We'll get that done. For you. Carolyn, this has just been fantastic. I mean, so many great insights. Where do we go to get more information about you and about your work?
Well, so my financial planning practice, we're not taking new clients. So just so people know that. And I don't really post all my other work out there. So where I post all my intersections of health and finance is CarolynMcClanahan.com. So I write for a number of publications, Forbes, Barron's, Advisor Perspectives, Financial Planning Magazine. So I collate all that work there, and hope to be doing even more. And so you'll hear more from me later.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for being with me. I so appreciate it, and I know that our audience does as well.
No, this was a lot of fun. So thank you so much for having me.
Sure. And just to remind everybody, we put these shows on every 2 weeks. We are here ready to take your questions, ready to listen to your comments, ready to listen to your suggestions. So please check back in 2 weeks' time. We will be talking about taxes. And if you're looking for additional resources, particularly on taking a sum of money and stretching it to make sure that it is around to last you the rest of your life, I hope that you will check out the resources from our sponsor, the Alliance for Lifetime Income. You'll find them at protectedincome.org. Thank you so much for being with me today, and I will see you next time.